Hi there. Let's talk about my top 5 tips for typography. These are some things that I have put together over time, some things that I've noticed that separate good typography from bad typography. So let's do a little rundown. First, type needs to communicate. At its core, that's what typography does. It's part of our language. It's how we communicate with one another. It started out a long time ago when we were setting up books and printing things for people to read and to share knowledge and information. So we can't ever let go of the fact that type is meant to tell a story, to say something, promote something, to be able to be read, be legible. So make sure that your type communicates. Whether you're working on a magazine, combining your text with images, or whether you're promoting a product or setting up a website, you need to make sure that your typography communicates the accurate message, the message that you want it to convey. Here's another concept that comes from David Carson, a really talented graphic designer. He likes to say that we shouldn't mistake legibility for communication. And so what does that actually mean? Well, that means that we can certainly make our type communicate, but does it have to be boring? Does it have to be so literal? No, people are sophisticated. In fact, in our world today, people, I think, skim read. So that means that if our type communicates effectively, someone doesn't actually have to dive in and read the entire message to get the gist of what's being said. So I think that's another way that type communicates, is not only what it says literally, but the message it conveys by the way it looks, or the way it's arranged, or the way it's put on the screen. So keep that in mind when you're working on your communication skills in your type as well. Here's another example where, honestly, I can't even read it. I don't know what it says, but it looks cool. And so what does that say? That says that this site was put together by a designer, and this is about design, and I can read a name there, so maybe this is the company, and they have this cool vibe, and it looks animated, it looks colorful. So I can read the subliminal message. The message is these guys are creative, and they're effective. So I want to work with them. All right, next tip, type needs to be logical. Now, when we think about what it means to be logical, think about Mr. Spock, right? Disregard all emotion and be pure logic. At its core, type is a logical language. It's something we use to communicate directly, to say what we mean. So we need to have a logic so that someone else can come behind us and read it and understand it. That's how language even works, right? So what does that mean visually speaking? That means we need to organize our type with grids, have logical areas where type goes, pictures go, so we can follow a message, read left to right, if that's our reading format, so we can find the information. I mean, it's kind of useless if our type doesn't actually share the information we're trying to convey. So we want to make sure that it's organized. This is an example of the New York map made by Massimo Vignelli, a famous graphic designer from the 60s who designed this entire map system based on Helvetica. And it's organized, it's logical, it makes sense. The letters and the words are easy to read, easy to follow, it's color-coded. This literally isn't the map of New York, but because of the way it's organized and the lines are drawn and things are set aside in a logical grid, we can read it and we can understand it. Design needs to be useful in that way. But there's a flip side to being logical. Sometimes we do have to go with our best guess. Sometimes we have to go with emotion, like Captain Kirk. Those two aren't actually in conflict. They work together. We need to be willing to go bold sometimes within the confines of a logical system. So we've talked about communication. We've talked about being logical and organized. Now we need to talk about using hierarchy. What is hierarchy? Well, hierarchy is being able to differentiate important things from less important things. You know, hierarchy is kind of like a monarchy, from, you know, the top dog to the next in command and so on, right? Well, that also works for type. Hierarchy lets the reader know where to look first. This is another form of being logical and organized, is using that hierarchy to kind of give the viewer an understanding of what they need to do, what they need to read. This can be done in a variety of ways. This is a simple diagram that shows sometimes it's done through scale, sometimes it's done through contrast and placement, sometimes it's done by changing direction of important things, sometimes it just put it at the top because it's the most important thing. You know, but there are dozens, hundreds of different ways to deal with hierarchy, and pay attention to that and make sure that the important things get the most attention in one form or another. Here's an example I stole from the web. Here's a layout that has some cool color, has an interesting dynamic. It's organized, it's structured. Do we know where to look? Yeah, we do. Whether it's the interesting graphic in the middle that attracts our attention, or whether it's the hello up at the top, or whether it's that button saying, contact me, contact me. You know, these are the things that help us read and kind of travel through a design. Very important. Here's another one. It's kind of pretentious, I guess, but hello, I'm John, a visual designer. But I like the way it was structured. You have this subdued picture in the background. You have this dude in the background. And then you have these little subheads and titles, and, you know, certain words are highlighted in yellow. There's an interesting little frame box that grabs your attention. And then there's a logical structure to where buttons are placed and things are done on the site. So there's a structure, and that structure is logical, but it also has a hierarchy. So I can read it, understand where to press, what to do next. You know, we want our visitors, we want our, you know, audience to be able to know what to do with the content we give them. If they don't know what to do with it and they don't know how to interpret it or use it, we make it too much of a barrier, too difficult for them to interact with, well, then they'll just leave and go somewhere else. You know, we don't want to make the puzzle too difficult to solve. Otherwise, they're just going to let it go. Too many other things competing for people's attention. So communicate, be logical, use hierarchy. Third, this one doesn't seem right, but I think it is. Be trendy. Now, trendy doesn't mean be a copycat. Trendy means understand trends and know where things are and why people do what they do. And then, you know, iterate. Here's a little hipster. You know, we're not trying to be a hipster graphic designer that just does and follows the crowd, you know, does whatever the crowd says, follows what they do, tries to be cool. You know, when you try to be cool, you're not cool anymore. So I've already given up. But it means that when you look back in history and you can see what trends designers have followed in the past, you can use that as a way to guide what you do next. Because we all inherit things from the previous generations. And typography is full of beautiful, inspirational design. And we need to go back and look at it and see if there's something that we can be inspired by and bring it into the modern age. This happens all the time in all kinds of art and design. People always look back and then they bring it forward and they iterate and they make it different. So here's an example of a really old type design from 1885. I mean, imagine doing that in 1885 by hand with pen and paper. But here is a modern example that was obviously inspired by that Victorian lettering and that Victorian design. But because it's been brought into the computer and it's been colored and revised and enhanced, look at how fresh and new and interesting it looks. You know, a vintage time period. We go back and we look at what was done in the 40s and the 30s and we see what they did with type. All without the aid of a computer, by the way, which I find really fascinating. Is sometimes I think modern designers with the computer have become pretty darn lazy. But you look in the back a few years and when they were doing it by hand and they had to do these things photographically or hand painted, it's amazing. You know, and then sometimes you can go in the not too distant past and pull something from, you know, different decades and bring it up and make it cool again. Same with, you know, this 80s design. Seems like this kind of thing is popping up all the time now. So when I say be trendy, I mean understand how to read trends, be inspired by trends, and make your version of those trends. Last but not least, I think it is really important to have a little bit of style, a little bit of personality in what you do. So what's an example of a font or a typeface that has no personality? Comic Sans. Okay, really? No offense to the designer, but we all know Comic Sans is terrible. And why is it terrible? Let me count the ways. It's supposed to be handwritten, but it's computer generated and it just looks clunky and nerdy, and just don't ever use it, right? What other typefaces fit in that category? Plenty. Plenty of fonts have zero to no style at all. Times New Roman has no style. Don't use it. It's a boring, average, mediocre typeface that comes installed on every computer and every typewriter for the past 100 years. No, just forget it. We don't need to use it anymore. We have way too many options out there for us to choose from. Don't just limit yourself to whatever happens to be installed on your computer. Be willing to dive a little deeper and look for more, interesting and original typefaces, but make sure they get the job done. Make sure that they communicate, make sure that they fit with the logic of your design, make sure that they follow hierarchy, and make sure that, what was my third one? Oh, that, that they're trendy. But again, that they have a little style. Here's another one that always comes up, papyrus. Of course, never use papyrus. It has been so overused, so overdone. It's been made fun of so many different times, but it's just no. So use this instead. My thanks to Barth & Company for making up this one. Comic Papyrus, the unholy alliance of all fonts, if I've ever seen one. So when I say have some style, here's some examples. Look for new stuff. What is a new, interesting sans serif font that maybe you haven't seen before? Something that looks a little bit different, doesn't, stands out a little bit. And what way does it fit the purpose of your design? How does it actually connect with the message that you're trying to convey? Are you trying to say something is a little bit modern, but it's a little understated, so it's a tapered and thin sans serif font? I mean, actually think about this stuff, right? Madeka, I saw this one. Looks really cool. It has some interesting edges, some interesting curves. There's some symmetry to the way the curves fit together on the different letters, and they're used and reused in different format. It's just unique. It looks different and fresh. This Connect typeface I thought was really clever. The way that, it's called Connect, yet it's broken. Ironic, interesting. Haven't seen a lot of it before, or maybe you have, but that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to find something with a little bit of style, a little bit of personality, and that does catch people's attention. And it shows that, hey, I put some thought into this. I actually purposefully chose this typeface for your benefit. I'm a real sucker for handwritten typefaces. You see them all over the place nowadays. And here's a good example of one that was made out of, somebody's brush script. There's another one, never use, brush script. But there are dozens and hundreds of examples of these handmade fonts. And I think what it does, especially in the digital world, is when you use a handwritten font like this, it feels like it has a handmade touch. And in a digital world where we're all hidden behind these screens, we look for humanity. We look for that human touch. And seeing a handwritten typeface, we know, even though we know it wasn't computer generated. We know that somebody put a little time and care into crafting it. And so it feels a little more special. So that's my top 5 tips for you today. Something to think about, something that you should try to use and think about as you, put your typefaces together, put your stuff together. So that's my message for you today. See you next time.